Who did this to you? The question wasn't loud, but it cut through the noise like it owned the room. I froze with a damp paper towel pressed against my wrist, staring at my reflection in the mirror like it might answer for me. The fluorescent lights above flickered just enough to make everything feel unreal. My pale skin, the faint purple shadow I had tried to cover, the tremble I couldn't quite hide. I wasn't supposed to be in this part of the restaurant. Employees used the back hallway bathroom, not this one with marble counters and soft gold lighting meant for people who never had to check their bank balance before ordering dinner. But I needed a second. Just one. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere no one would look too closely. I didn't hear him come in. That was the first thing I realized. A man like him should have made noise, footsteps, presence, something. But there had been nothing. 1 second I was alone. The next he was behind me, reflected in the mirror like a shadow that had decided to take shape. Dominic Russo didn't look at me the way men usually did. Not curious, not impressed, not even kind. He looked like he was reading something written under my skin. His suit was perfectly tailored, dark enough to absorb the light. His posture relaxed but precise, like every movement had already been decided before it happened. I turned too quickly, the paper towel slipping from my fingers and landing in the sink. "I'm sorry," I said automatically, the way you do when you've done nothing wrong but feel like you have anyway. I didn't realize this was your wrist. His voice was low, controlled, not a question, a direction. I instinctively pulled my sleeve down, but it was too late. He had already seen. Of course he had. Men like him didn't miss things. "It's nothing," I added quickly, forcing a small laugh that sounded thin even to me. "Just clumsy. I hit a door." The words came out practiced, polished. I had said them before. He didn't move closer right away. That somehow made it worse. The silence stretched, heavy and deliberate, until I could hear the faint hum of the overhead lights and the distant clink of glasses from the dining room. Then he stepped forward. Just one step. Close enough that I could feel the shift in. The air, like the temperature had changed without permission. His hand closed gently around my wrist. Not tight, not forceful, but firm enough that I couldn't pretend it wasn't happening. His touch was warm, steady, completely certain. I stopped breathing. "Who did this to you?" he repeated, softer this time. Not demanding, not angry, just inevitable. I shook my head too fast. "No one. I told you, it's just don't." One word. Quiet. Final. It wasn't a threat. It didn't need to be. I swallowed, my pulse loud in my ears, my eyes dropping anywhere but his. The mirror. The counter. The place where his hand met my skin like it had always belonged there. "You don't understand," I whispered, because that was easier than telling the truth. "It doesn't matter." For a moment, he said nothing. His thumb shifted slightly, just enough to feel the rhythm of my pulse. Measuring it, memorizing it. Then he let go, just like that. No argument, no pressure. His hand dropped to his side, as if the moment had already ended for him. But his eyes stayed on me, unchanged, calculating in a way that made my chest tighten. "It matters," he said quietly. Not to me. Not really. To himself. Like he had already decided something I wasn't part of. I stepped back, pulling my sleeve down again, putting space between us even though it didn't feel like it made any difference. "I should get back to work," I murmured, reaching for the door, my fingers brushing the handle. I didn't wait for permission. I didn't look back. But as I walked down the hallway, past the noise and the lights and the people who had no idea anything had just changed, I felt it. Not his touch. Not his voice. Something else. Something colder. Quieter. Like a decision had already been made somewhere I couldn't see. And for the first time that night, I realized the truth wasn't that he believed me. It was that he didn't need to. The rest of my shift passed in a blur that felt too sharp to be a blur, every sound louder than it should have been, every movement just slightly off, like the world had shifted half an inch and I was the only one who noticed. Plates clinked. Orders were called. Someone laughed too loudly at table 12. I moved through it all. On autopilot, tray balanced in my hands, steps measured, smile practiced. But my mind kept replaying the same moment over and over again. His voice. His hand. The way he had said it matters like it was already decided. I told myself I was imagining things. That men like Dominic Russo did not concern themselves with people like me. Waitresses did not become problems. Waitresses did not become anything at all. And yet every time I passed the corner booth where he sat, I felt it. Not his eyes directly, That would have been easier. It was the awareness of them, like standing too close to the edge of something deep without ever looking down. Near the end of my shift, I was refilling water glasses at a table by the window when Maria leaned in close, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do not look now," she said, which of course made it impossible not to. I kept my eyes on the pitcher, pouring slowly. "What?" I murmured. "Half the men in this place have been on their phones for the last 20 minutes, she continued. "And not texting. Calling. Something is going on." I forced a small shrug. "Maybe it is business." "No," she said quickly. "This is different." I set the pitcher down carefully, my fingers steady even as something uneasy curled in my chest. I told myself it had nothing to do with me. It could not. It should not. By the time I clocked out, the air outside felt colder than it had earlier, the kind of chill that slipped under your coat and stayed there. My car was parked 2 blocks away, under a flickering streetlight that buzzed faintly in the quiet. I wrapped my arms around myself as I walked, my shoes tapping against the pavement in a rhythm that sounded too loud for the empty street. I kept my head down. I always did. It was easier that way. Safer. The night smelled like rain that had not fallen yet, heavy and waiting. I reached my car and fumbled for my keys, my hands slower than usual, like my body was trying to tell me something my mind refused to hear. That was when I noticed it. Not movement. Not a sound. A feeling. The kind that makes the back of your neck tighten before you understand why. I turned slightly, just enough to glance over my shoulder. Across the street, a black sedan sat parked with its headlights off. It had not been there when I arrived for my shift. I was sure of that. The windows were dark, impossible to see through, reflecting nothing but the weak glow of the streetlight above me. I told myself it meant nothing. People parked everywhere in this city. Cars did not belong to stories. They were just cars. Still, I did not move right away. I stood there, keys in hand, staring a second too long before forcing myself to unlock the door. The soft click sounded louder than it should have. I slipped into the driver's seat quickly, locking the door behind me, my breath catching as I exhaled. Do not be dramatic, I thought. Do not turn this into something it is not. I started the engine. The headlights cut through the darkness, washing over the empty street, over the parked cars, over the sedan across from me. For a split second, the light caught the outline of someone in the driver's seat. Still, watching, my heart stuttered, just once. Then the light shifted, and the reflection was gone. I blinked, gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary. When I looked again, there was nothing unusual. Just another car. Just another night. But as I pulled away from the curb, merging into the quiet street, I could not shake the feeling that something had already started moving long before I ever noticed it. And somewhere behind me, unseen and silent, it was still following. I did not sleep. Not really. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, watching shadows move across it as headlights passed outside, each one making my chest tighten before I could stop it. Every sound felt too close. A car door slamming somewhere down the street. Footsteps on the sidewalk. The hum of the old refrigerator in my kitchen. I kept telling myself it was nothing. That I was safe. That I had been safe before and nothing had changed. But something had changed. I could feel it in the quiet. Morning came slowly, pale light slipping through the thin curtains, turning everything gray and soft in a way that should have felt peaceful, but did not. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, the sudden vibration making me flinch before I reached for it. A message. Not from anyone I wanted to hear from. I stared at the name on the screen, my thumb hovering as if not touching it could somehow undo its existence. Then it buzzed again, and again. The same name. The same presence I had tried to shrink away from, pretend did not control the rhythm of my days. I opened the message with a breath I did not realize I had been holding. Where are you? No greeting. No softness. Just a demand. Another message followed immediately. Do not ignore me. My stomach twisted, the familiar weight settling in, heavy and exhausting. I typed a response, erased it, typed again, erased it again. There was no right answer. There never was. I set the phone down without replying, pressing my palms against my eyes until I saw flashes of light behind them. I had to go to work. That was the rule. Keep moving. Keep everything normal. The routine was the only thing that made it manageable. The streets were already busy when I stepped outside. People moving with purpose, coffee cups in hand, conversations overlapping in a steady hum that made it easier to disappear. I kept my head down as I walked the 3 blocks to the bus stop, my coat pulled tight around me even though the air was not as cold as it had been the night before. Halfway there, I felt it again. That same awareness. Subtle, persistent, like a thread being pulled gently but steadily from somewhere behind me. I slowed slightly, pretending to adjust the strap of my bag, using the motion as an excuse to glance at the reflection in a storefront window. People passed behind me. A woman with a stroller. A man talking on his phone. A delivery truck idling at the curb. And then, just at the edge of the reflection, a familiar shape. Dark. Still. The same black sedan. My breath caught, just for a second, before I forced it steady again. It could be a coincidence. It had to be. Cities were full of the same cars, the same faces, the same patterns repeating over and over again. I turned forward again and kept walking, a little faster now, my steps quick but controlled. Do not run. Running makes it real. The bus arrived just as I reached the stop, the doors folding open with a mechanical sigh. I climbed on, dropping my fare into the machine, and moved toward a seat near the middle. Not too close to the front. Not too far in the back. Somewhere in between. Somewhere safe. I sat down, my hands folded tightly in my lap, staring straight ahead as the bus pulled away from the curb. I did not look out the window at first. I did not want to see. But after a moment, curiosity or fear or something in between made me glance sideways. The sedan was there. 2 cars behind the bus, moving at the same pace, steady and unhurried. My pulse began to rise, each beat louder than the last, echoing in my ears. This was not random. This was not coincidence. I swallowed hard, my fingers tightening together until they ached. I should have felt panic. I should have felt afraid. And I did. But underneath it, quieter, almost impossible to admit, was something else. Something colder. Something steadier. The memory of his voice. It matters. I turned my gaze forward again, forcing myself to breathe slowly, evenly, like I could control the moment if I controlled my body. Because somewhere deep down, a realization was beginning to take shape, one I did not fully understand yet, but could not ignore. I was not being followed by danger. I was being watched by something that had already decided what to do about it. And that was somehow even more terrifying. By the time I stepped off the bus, my hands had gone cold despite the morning sun rising higher above the buildings, casting long shadows across the sidewalk that stretched like quiet warnings I could not quite name. The city felt louder than usual, car horns sharper, voices quicker, everything moving just a little too fast, as if I had fallen half a step behind the rhythm everyone else understood. I adjusted my bag on my shoulder and walked the remaining block to the restaurant, my pace steady even though my thoughts were anything but. I did not look back. I did not need to. I could feel it. That same presence. Not close enough to touch, not obvious enough to point at, but there, constant and patient, like it was not worried about losing me. Inside, the warmth hit me first, followed by the familiar scent of coffee and polished wood. It should have grounded me. It always did. But today, it felt like stepping into a place that belonged to someone else's life. I tied my apron, smoothed down my uniform, and forced myself into motion. Orders. Tables. Smiles. Routine. Control what you can. Ignore what you cannot. That was how I had survived this long. Around mid-morning, the manager called me over, his expression tighter than usual, his voice lower as if he did not want anyone else to hear. "Claire," he said, glancing toward the front windows before looking back at me. "Did you bring someone with you today?" The question caught me off guard. "No," I answered immediately, shaking my head. "Why?" He hesitated, then gestured subtly toward the entrance. "There are 2 men outside. Suits. They have been there since before we opened." My stomach dropped, a slow, heavy feeling that spread outward, tightening everything in its path. "Are they customers?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. He gave a short, humorless laugh. "If they are the most patient ones I have ever seen." I turned before I could stop myself, my gaze drifting toward the glass doors. At first, I saw nothing unusual, just people passing by, the usual flow of the morning crowd. Then I noticed them, standing still, not talking, not checking their phones, just watching. Dark suits, perfectly fitted, their posture relaxed but deliberate in a way that made it clear they were not waiting for a table. They were waiting for something else. Or someone. My chest tightened, my breath catching just enough to make me aware of it. "Do you want me to call someone?" my manager asked quietly. I shook my head again, too quickly. "No, it is probably nothing," I said, forcing the words out, even as they felt thin and unconvincing. Because I knew. Deep down, I knew exactly what it was. Not danger. Not yet. Something else. Something controlled. Something chosen. I turned back to my work, but it was impossible to ignore now. Every time the door opened, I felt it. Every time a shadow moved across the floor, my attention snapped to it before I could stop myself. They did not come in. They did not speak. They just stayed there, like silent markers placed around a line I could not see. By noon, the tension had settled into something heavier, quieter. Not panic, not fear. Awareness. The kind that made every movement deliberate, every word measured. I was carrying a tray to table 6 when the door finally opened and one of them stepped inside. The room did not change. No one gasped. No one noticed anything unusual. But I felt it. The shift. Subtle but absolute. He walked past the tables without looking at anyone. His gaze fixed ahead until it found me. Not searching. Not questioning. Certain. I stopped where I was, the tray steady in my hands even as my pulse began to rise again. He did not come too close. He did not reach for me. He simply stood there, just far enough to be polite, just close enough to make it clear this was not a coincidence. "Miss Bennett," he said, his voice calm, professional, like this was a normal conversation in the middle of a normal day. "Mr. Russo would like to know if you arrived safely." For a moment, I could not speak. The words echoed in my mind, settling into place with a clarity that made everything else fall away. This was not random. This was not uncertain. This was intentional. I swallowed, forcing my voice steady. "I did," I said quietly. He nodded once, a small, precise movement, as if that was all he needed. As if that answer alone had already been expected. "Good," he replied. Then he stepped back, turning without another word, walking out the same way he had come, leaving nothing behind but the weight of a realization I could no longer ignore. I was not being followed. I was being protected, and I had never asked for it. The rest of the afternoon moved differently after that, like the air itself had shifted into something heavier, more deliberate, every second stretching just enough for me to notice it. I tried to focus on my work, on the familiar rhythm of taking orders and delivering plates, but the awareness never left. It stayed just beneath the surface, steady and unyielding, like a quiet reminder that I was no longer invisible. Every time I passed the front windows, I saw them. Not always the same faces, but always the same presence. Dark suits, still posture, eyes that did not wander. They did not come inside again. They did not speak to anyone else. They simply remained, as if the sidewalk itself had decided to stand guard. Around 3 in the afternoon, my phone buzzed again in my apron pocket, the vibration sharp enough to make me pause mid-step. I did not need to check the screen to know who it was. The pattern had already been set. I stepped into the back hallway, away from the noise of the dining room, and pulled the phone out slowly, my fingers tightening around it before I unlocked it. 3 messages, all from the same name. "Why are you not answering me?" Another, "I know you are working. Do not ignore me." And the last one, sent just seconds ago. "I am coming there." My breath caught, the words settling into my chest like something heavy and unavoidable. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at the screen, my mind racing through possibilities I did not want to consider. He had said things like this before. Threats disguised as concern. Control wrapped in urgency. But this felt different. Not because of him. Because of everything else. Because of the men outside. Because of the quiet, controlled presence that had followed me since last night. Because of the name that now carried more weight than I understood. Dominic Russo. I locked my phone without replying, slipping it back into my pocket as if ignoring it could somehow delay what was coming. But the tension had already started building, tight and sharp, like the moment before a storm breaks. I returned to the dining room, my movements automatic, my smile practiced, but my attention split between every sound, every shift in the room. The front door opened, closed, opened again. Each time, my heart reacted before my mind could catch up. It happened just after 4. The door swung open harder than usual, the sound cutting through the low hum of conversation like a crack in glass. I did not have to look to know it was him. I felt it. The change in the room. Subtle, but immediate. Conversations softened. Movement slowed. something instinctive in the air responding to a presence that did not belong in quiet spaces. I turned slowly, my hands steady despite the way my pulse had begun to climb. He stood just inside the entrance, his eyes already scanning, already searching. And then they found me. They always did. There was no hesitation in the way he moved toward me, weaving through tables with a confidence that bordered on ownership, like every step he took was one he had already decided long before he walked through that door. "Claire," he said, his voice sharp, controlled, carrying just enough to make it clear he was not here to wait. I forced myself to hold his gaze, to stand still instead of stepping back the way my body wanted to. "You should not be here," I said quietly, the words coming out steadier than I felt. A flicker of something crossed his expression, something close to irritation, but it vanished almost immediately. "You did not answer," he replied, as if that explained everything. As if it always would. He reached for my arm, his hand closing around it in a way that was familiar, predictable, something I had learned to endure rather than resist. But before I could react, before I could even process the movement, another hand appeared. Not forceful, not aggressive, just there, firm, unyielding. It wrapped around his wrist, stopping him mid-motion like time itself had decided to pause. The shift was instant. The air changed. Not louder, not chaotic, just colder, slower. I did not have to turn to know who it was. I felt that too, the same way I had felt it the night before. Controlled, certain. I looked anyway. Dominic Russo stood beside me, his expression unreadable, his posture relaxed in a way that made everything else feel sharper by comparison. His grip was steady, not tightening, not shaking, just present enough to make a statement without raising his voice. "She said no," he said quietly. Not loud, not angry, just final. And for the first time since I had known him, the man in front of me hesitated. For a moment, no one moved. The entire room seemed to hold its breath, suspended in a silence that felt too deliberate to be accidental. His hand was still on my arm, but it had loosened, just slightly, as if something unseen had shifted the balance of the moment. Dominic did not raise his voice. He did not step closer. He did not need to. His presence filled the space in a way that made everything else feel smaller, quieter, like the world had adjusted around him without asking permission. The man in front of me let out a short breath, something between frustration and disbelief, his eyes flicking from Dominic's hand to his face, searching for something he could challenge, something he could push against. He did not find it. "This is none of your business," he said finally, his voice lower now, controlled but lacking the sharp edge it had carried just seconds ago. Dominic's expression did not change, not even slightly. "It became my business the moment you touched her," he replied, calm and measured, each word placed exactly where it needed to be. There was no threat in his tone. That was what made it worse. It was not a warning. It was a conclusion. I felt my pulse in my throat, steady but loud, my awareness narrowing to the space between them, to the invisible line that had been drawn without anyone acknowledging it out loud. The man hesitated again, his jaw tightening, his hand dropping fully from my arm as if he had suddenly remembered something he could not afford to ignore. He glanced around, just briefly, as if noticing for the first time that the room was no longer neutral ground, that the quiet observers by the door were not random, that the balance of control had shifted in a way he did not understand but could feel. "Claire," he said, turning back to me, his voice softer now, almost reasonable, like he could rewrite the moment if he changed his tone. "We just need to talk." I swallowed, my fingers tightening at my sides, the familiar pull of obligation and fear rising instinctively. The part of me that had learned to keep things calm, to avoid escalation, to make everything easier by giving in just enough. But before I could respond, before I could fall back into that pattern, Dominic spoke again. "No," he said simply. Not louder, not harsher, just absolute. The words settled into the space between us like something solid, something that could not be moved or negotiated. I felt it more than I heard it. The man's expression shifted again, frustration flickering into something sharper before it was quickly masked, his shoulders straightening as if he was trying to reclaim something that had already slipped away. "You do not get to decide that," he said, but there was hesitation now, a crack in the certainty that had been there before. Dominic's gaze remained steady, unwavering, his posture relaxed in a way that made the tension around him feel almost controlled, contained within boundaries only he could see. "I already did," he replied. Silence followed. Not empty. Not uncertain. Final. The kind of silence that comes after a decision has been made and nothing else needs to be said. The man exhaled slowly, his eyes lingering on me for a moment longer, something unreadable passing through them before he stepped back. One step, then another. Each movement careful, measured, like he was choosing not to push further, not because he agreed, but because he understood the cost of doing so. He turned without another word, walking out the same way he had entered, the tension in the room easing just slightly as the door closed behind him. I stood there, still and quiet, my heart still racing even as everything around me began to return to normal. Conversations resumed. Glasses clinked. The world moved forward as if nothing had happened. But it had. I knew it had. I felt it in the way my breathing slowly steadied, in the way my shoulders relaxed without me telling them to, in the absence of something I had grown used to carrying. Dominic released his hold completely, his hand falling back to his side, the contact gone but the awareness of it still lingering. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then, quietly, without looking away, he said, "He will not come back." Not a promise, not a guess, a certainty. And for the first time, I believed him. I did not realize how tightly I had been holding myself together until it was over. Not the moment itself, not the confrontation, but the silence that followed. It settled slowly, like dust after something had shifted just enough to leave everything looking the same, but feeling different. I stood there for a second too long, my hands still at my sides, my breathing uneven in a way I could not quite control. The room moved around me again, voices rising and falling, chairs scraping lightly against the floor, the ordinary rhythm of a place that had no idea it had just become something else. I became aware of him beside me before I looked. Not because he moved. He did not. It was the absence of pressure, the absence of urgency. The kind of stillness that did not ask for anything, did not demand a reaction. It just existed. I turned my head slowly, meeting Dominic's gaze without meaning to, and for a moment, everything else faded again. Not in a dramatic way. Not like the world stopped. Just quieter. Focused. His expression had not changed. It rarely did. But there was something there now that had not been before. Not softness. Not exactly. Something closer to recognition. Like he had confirmed something he had already suspected. "You are shaking," he said quietly. I blinked, surprised, looking down at my hands as if they belonged to someone else. They were steady now. Mostly. "I am fine," I answered, the words automatic, familiar, worn smooth from use. He did not argue. He did not contradict me. He simply watched, the silence between us stretching in a way that felt intentional rather than empty. "You do not have to say that here," he said after a moment, his voice low enough that no one else would hear. The statement lingered, settling somewhere deeper than I expected, touching something I had learned to keep quiet. I swallowed, my gaze drifting away from his, back to the room, to the normalcy I was supposed to return to. "It is easier," I admitted before I could stop myself. The honesty surprised me. It surprised him too, just slightly, a flicker in his eyes that was gone almost as quickly as it appeared. "Easier for who?" he asked, not pressing, not pushing, just placing the question where I could not ignore it. I did not answer. I did not need to. We both knew. A server passed by, brushing lightly against my shoulder with a quick apology, pulling me back into the present, into the role I was supposed to play. I picked up my tray again, grounding myself in the weight of it, in the familiarity of movement and task and purpose. But something had changed. I could feel it in the way my chest no longer felt tight, in the way my breath came a little easier without me forcing it. Dominic stepped back slightly, giving me space without fully leaving, his presence still there, still steady, but no longer pressing against the moment. "Finish your shift," he said quietly. Not a command. Not quite a suggestion either. Something in between. I nodded before I could think about it, the motion small but certain. As I turned to walk away, too, return to the tables and the noise and the routine that had always defined my world, I hesitated. Just for a second. Then I looked back. He was still there, exactly where I had left him, watching, not in a way that felt invasive, but in a way that felt intentional. Protective. The words settled in my mind. Unfamiliar and uncomfortable and strangely steady all at once. I turned away again, continuing forward, but the awareness followed me. Not heavy, not suffocating, just present. By the time the shift ended, the sky outside had softened into the muted colors of early evening, the light fading into something calmer, something quieter. I untied my apron, my movements slower now, more deliberate, as if I was no longer rushing to keep up with something I could not control. When I stepped outside, the air felt different. Cooler, clearer. The men were still there. Not the same ones, but the same presence, the same quiet certainty. I paused on the sidewalk, my gaze lifting just slightly as I took it in, the realization settling fully into place. This was not temporary. This was not accidental. This was a line that had been drawn around me without my permission. I should have felt trapped. I should have felt overwhelmed. But instead, standing there in the fading light, I felt something else. Something unfamiliar. Something steady. For the first time in a long time, I did not feel alone. And that scared me more than anything else. The streetlights flickered on one by one as the last of the daylight slipped away, casting everything in a softer glow that made the city feel almost unfamiliar, like a place that existed just slightly outside of time. I stood there longer than I should have, my fingers curled loosely around the strap of my bag, watching the quiet choreography unfold in front of me. A car passed. Someone laughed across the street. A door closed somewhere behind me. Normal sounds. Normal movement. And yet, nothing felt entirely normal anymore. I exhaled slowly and started walking, my steps measured, my pace steady, not rushing but not lingering either. The presence followed. Not directly behind me. Not close enough to feel threatening. Just there. Consistent. Unchanging. I did not turn around this time. I did not need confirmation. I already understood. Halfway down the block, my phone buzzed again. The sound sharp in the quiet evening air. I pulled it out, my thumb hovering for just a second before I looked at the screen. No name this time. No contact saved. Just a single message. It is handled. I stared at the words, reading them once, then again, my mind trying to place them into something logical, something I could understand. Handled. The word felt too simple. Too final. A second message followed almost immediately. You are safe. My breath caught, the air leaving my lungs slower this time, as if my body was trying to adjust to something it had never known how to process. Safe. The words settled differently. Not like a promise I had heard before. Not like something temporary or conditional. Something else. Something heavier. I locked my phone without replying, my fingers tightening slightly before I slipped it back into my bag. I did not know what had been done. I did not ask. Part of me did not want to know. But another part, quieter and harder to ignore, understood exactly what those words meant. Not the details. The outcome. The certainty. I reached my building and paused at the entrance, my reflection faint in the glass door, my own face looking back at me like it belonged to someone else. The tension that had lived in my shoulders for so long was not there. Not completely gone, but quieter. Looser. Like something had been removed, without me realizing how much space it had taken up. I pushed the door open and stepped inside, the familiar scent of the hallway wrapping around me, grounding me in something real. The elevator ride was silent, the hum of the machinery steady and predictable, giving me a moment to breathe, to think, to try to understand what had shifted in the last 24 hours. When the doors opened, I walked down the hall to my apartment, my keys already in my hand. I hesitated for just a second before unlocking the door, the habit of caution still there, still ingrained. But when I stepped inside, nothing felt wrong. No tension in the air. No sense of waiting. Just my space. Quiet. Still. Mine. I closed the door behind me, leaning against it for a moment, my eyes closing as I let out a breath I had not realized I had been holding all day. The silence was different now. Not heavy. Not filled with expectation. Just quiet. My phone buzzed one more time, the sound softer this time, almost distant. I opened my eyes and reached for it slowly, already knowing who it would be before I looked. One message. No greeting. No signature. Just a single line. No one will bother you again. I read it once, my gaze lingering on the words, the weight of them settling into something steady and undeniable. This was not temporary. This was not a warning. This was a decision. I lowered the phone slightly, my fingers relaxing around it as I stared at nothing in particular, my thoughts quieter than they had been in a long time. Somewhere out there, beyond the walls of this apartment, beyond the streets and the lights, and the people who moved through their lives without noticing the shifts happening around them. Something had changed. Not loudly, not visibly, but completely. I did not know what tomorrow would look like. I did not know what this meant for me, for him, for anything that came next. But as I stood there in the quiet, one truth settled into place with a clarity I could not ignore. He had not asked for my trust. He had not asked for my permission. He had simply removed the thing that made me afraid. And now, standing in the absence of that fear, I was left with something I did not know how to face. The realization that safety, once given, is not easy to walk away from. Morning did not arrive all at once. It came slowly, inch by inch, light stretching across the floor of my apartment like it was testing whether it was allowed to stay. I stood by the window longer than I needed to, my fingers resting lightly against the glass, watching the city wake up without me. Cars moved. People crossed the street. Someone walked a dog that pulled too hard on its leash. Ordinary things. The kind of ordinary I used to rely on. But something inside me had shifted, and now even the normal felt different. Quieter. Clearer. Like a noise I had lived with for years had suddenly been turned off, leaving behind a silence I did not know how to fill. I got ready for work the same way I always did, following the same steps. The same routine, but there was no rush in it. No urgency pushing me forward. When my phone stayed silent, I noticed. Not because I was waiting for it, but because I was used to the interruption, the tension of not knowing when it would come. Now, there was nothing. Just stillness. The walk to the bus stop felt shorter than usual. Or maybe I just was not counting every step anymore. I caught my reflection in a store window as I passed, and for a moment, I did not recognize the girl looking back. Not because she looked different, because she looked lighter. Not happy. Not exactly. Just unburdened in a way that felt unfamiliar. When I reached the corner, I paused automatically, my eyes scanning the street before I could stop myself. And then I saw them. Not one car this time. Not hidden. Not distant. The same presence, but clearer now. Intentional. A black sedan parked along the curb, engine running, windows tinted just enough to blur the details but not erase them. And two men standing a few feet away, their posture calm, their attention subtle but unmistakable. They were not watching everyone. They were watching me. I felt it settle into place without resistance this time. Not fear. Recognition. I exhaled slowly and stepped forward, continuing toward the bus stop without hesitation. The bus arrived, the doors opening with that same familiar sound, and I climbed on, moving through the aisle to my usual seat. I did not look back right away. I did not need to. But after a moment, I let my gaze drift to the window. The sedan was still there. Still steady. Still following. Not chasing. Not rushing. Just there. Constant. Predictable. I sat back, my hands resting loosely in my lap, my breathing even, my thoughts quieter than they had been in a long time. It should have felt overwhelming. To know that something this powerful had decided to place itself around me without asking. It should have felt like losing control. But it did not. Because for the first time, I realized something I had not allowed myself to think before. Control had never really been mine. Not in the way I had believed. I had been reacting, adjusting, surviving. This was different. This was something choosing to stand between me and everything that had once made me small. When I arrived at the restaurant, the doors opened like they always did, the same warmth, the same sounds, the same routine waiting for me inside. But the difference was in how I stepped through it. Not cautious, not bracing, just walking. Maria noticed it first. "You look different," she said, studying me for a second longer than usual. I shrugged lightly, tying my apron with steady hands. "I feel different," I admitted, the words simple but true. She smiled like she wanted to ask more, but did not. Some things are easier left unspoken. As the morning moved forward, I worked the same tables, carried the same trays, spoke the same words. But nothing felt heavy anymore. The tension was gone. Not hidden. Not waiting. Gone. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew why. Not how. Not exactly what had been done, or what lines had been crossed, or what decisions had been made in places I would never see. But I knew the result. No one called. No one came looking. No one reached for me like I was something they could claim. The space around me stayed clear. Untouched. By the time the afternoon light began to fade again, I stepped outside once more, the cool air brushing against my skin in a way that felt almost new. The sedan was there. Of course it was. But this time, when I looked at it, I did not feel watched. I felt guarded. The difference was small, but it changed everything. I stood there for a moment, letting that realization settle, letting it take shape into something I could finally understand. He did not just remove what hurt me. He changed the way the world was allowed to reach me. And as I turned away, stepping forward into a life that no longer felt like something I had to endure, one thought stayed with me, quiet but certain. He did not ask me to trust him. He made it impossible not to.